April 17, 1945. A German woman sat on the floor of an American army truck and tried not to breathe too loudly. Her name was Hilde Kraus. She was 23 years old. She had worked telephone lines for the Wehrmacht since she was 19. Not because she was brave, not because she wanted glory, because she could remember numbers, keep her hands steady under pressure, and disconnect a dead line without crying. Now the truck was slowing down. Outside, she heard a chain gate scrape open. 58 women were packed around her. Nurses, switchboard operators, stenographers, radio auxiliaries. Most of them were younger than 25. Every one of them had been told what the Americans would do. They had heard it from officers, from posters, from radio speeches, from men who sounded certain even while Germany was collapsing around them. Americans did not take prisoners. Americans starved enemies. Americans smiled first and punished later. So when the truck stopped, Hilde expected a beating. What she did not expect was a clean barracks, a bar of soap, a folded blanket, and a square of white bread covered in a brown sticky paste that looked like something scraped from a machine room. The Americans called it peanut butter. Hilde looked at it and thought, this is how they poison us. Within 6 weeks, that same brown paste would become the one thing those women asked for when it disappeared. Not because it tasted good, because it arrived on the same day, on the same trays, in the same mess hall, served by the same cook who ate from the same supply. And that was the first crack in a lie powerful enough to survive a war. Germany in April of 1945 was not falling anymore. It was breaking. The Eastern Front had been torn open by the Soviets. The Western Front was pushing inward under American, British, and Canadian pressure. Roads were crowded with refugees, broken units, abandoned carts, and soldiers who had stopped believing orders could save them. But propaganda does not stop just because buildings fall. Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi information machine had spent years making one thing clear. Surrender was not safety. Surrender was the beginning of humiliation, or hunger, or death. For German women in military support roles, that fear had a special weight. They were not frontline infantry. Most had never fired a rifle in combat. They had typed orders, patched telephone circuits, carried medical records, logged radio traffic, and kept the machinery of war moving from rooms behind the front. But when the front collapsed, their uniforms were enough. Hilde had been captured near a communications depot outside Leipzig after the officers vanished overnight. One morning there had been maps on the wall and a captain shouting into a dead telephone. By afternoon the captain was gone. By evening American soldiers were standing in the doorway. They searched the room, collected papers, asked names, took identification cards. Nobody struck her. That should have comforted Hilde. It did not. Fear does not surrender just because no one has hurt you yet. 2 days later, she and 57 other women were moved to a temporary holding camp in Oklahoma, inside a converted cotton warehouse surrounded by wire and floodlights. To the Americans, the camp was nothing dramatic. A processing site. A clean place to hold prisoners until transportation and paperwork caught up with the war. To the women stepping off the truck, it looked like the end of the world. The barracks smelled of pine boards, lye soap, canvas, and summer dust. The mattresses were thin but dry. The washroom had running water. The guards were young, bored, and more curious than cruel. That was almost worse. Cruelty would have matched the story they had been told. Ordinary treatment did not. The first meal came that evening. The cook in charge was Staff Sergeant Benjamin Lawson, 29 years old, from Macon, Georgia. Before the Army, Lawson had worked in his uncle's diner, where breakfast started before sunrise and nobody sent a plate out cold unless they wanted his aunt to throw a spoon at them. He was not a philosopher. He was not part of any grand plan to reshape defeated enemies. He was a cook. His job was simple. Get enough food hot, get it served clean, and make sure nothing usable went into the garbage. On that first night, the menu was ordinary American Army food. Bean stew, boiled carrots, powdered milk, white bread, and peanut butter from a government tin. To Lawson, it was not even a dish. It was filler, protein, calories, something soldiers could eat fast when meat deliveries were late. He spread it thick across slices of bread because that was how the supply order worked. 1 ration scoop per person. 58 prisoners plus guards plus kitchen detail. He did not know that many German women in that room had never seen peanut butter before. He did not know that in their kitchens back home, preserved food meant smoked sausage, dark bread, pickled cabbage, potatoes kept in cellars, jars labeled by careful hands. He did not know that a glossy brown paste made from crushed peanuts and oil could look, to a frightened prisoner, like industrial grease. He only knew the trays were ready. Hilde sat at the second table from the wall. The tray landed in front of her. She smelled beans first, then metal, then something nutty, oily, and sweet in a way that did not belong with prison. She stared at the bread. The paste held the light. It did not melt. It did not run. It sat there thick and quiet. The woman beside her whispered, "Was es das? What is that?" No one answered. Across the mess hall, an American private took his own tray, sat near the door, folded his bread, and bit into it without ceremony. Hilde watched his jaw move. He did not fall over. He did not cough. He did not laugh at them. He just chewed. That made the moment more confusing, not less. Hilde picked up the bread with 2 fingers. The surface tugged against the soft white crumb. She took the smallest bite she could. It sealed her mouth shut. The paste stuck to her tongue. It clung to the roof of her mouth. The sweetness came first, then salt, then a heavy roasted taste that felt too rich after months of thin rations. Her throat tightened. She reached for the powdered milk and drank too fast. The woman across from her saw the panic and pushed her own bread away. A nervous laugh moved through the table. Then Hilde did something she would remember for the rest of her life. She raised the bread slightly toward the nearest guard and asked in German, "Gift? Poison?" The guard did not understand the word, but he understood her face. He looked at the bread, looked at Hilde, then looked down at his own tray. He picked up his peanut butter bread, took a large bite, and held both hands out as if to say, "See? No trick. No punishment. Just food." Hilde stared at him for a long moment. Then she took another bite, smaller this time, and because hunger was stronger than suspicion, she kept chewing until she could swallow. Around her, the other women were doing the same calculation. Some ate because they were starving. Some ate because the guard had eaten it first. Some scraped the brown pastes away with the edge of a spoon and swallowed only the bread. One girl, no older than 18, cried silently into her cup because she could not decide whether kindness from an enemy was safer or more dangerous than hatred. Lawson watched from the serving line. He had seen prisoners complain before. Italian prisoners complained about pasta. French prisoners complained about coffee. American soldiers complained about everything. But this was different. These women were not being difficult. They were trying to understand why the monster in their imagination had given them a meal. That night, after the trays came back, Lawson made his normal kitchen entry. 58 prisoner meals served, bread fully issued, bean stew mostly consumed, peanut butter return, heavy. Then in the margin he added a note that was not required by protocol. New German women do not know peanut butter. Fear issue. Watch. That was all. He did not know that the margin would become more important than the meal. In the first week, the women moved like people waiting for the real captivity to begin. They folded blankets carefully because they were afraid of punishment. They asked permission before using the washroom. They flinched when a guard raised his voice across the yard. But nothing happened. Breakfast came, lunch came, supper came, on time, every day. The food was not elegant. It was army food. Beans, potatoes, canned meat, oatmeal, cabbage bread, coffee so weak even the guards complained about it. But it was steady, and steadiness can feel like mercy when the world has become a machine for surprises. Wednesday supper became the strange one. Bean stew, white bread, peanut butter. The women called it brown butter because the German word for peanut did not come naturally to every tongue in the barracks. The first Wednesday, more than half of it came back. The second Wednesday, less came back. By the third Wednesday, the return trays told a different story. The women had invented methods. Thin it with stew. Fold the bread twice. Drink before the bite, not after. Eat the carrots first so the sweetness made sense. Never take too large a mouthful. These were not recipes. They were prison adaptations. Small rituals built around a food they still did not understand. Lawson noticed because cooks notice what speeches miss. He noticed the woman at the second table no longer pushed the bread aside. He noticed the youngest girl stopped crying when the brown butter appeared. He noticed one of the older nurses used a knife to divide her portion into 4 exact strips, eating one at a time like medicine. He also noticed something else. The guards were eating the same bread, same tin, same scoop, same counter, no better ration hidden in the back, no separate prisoner food, no humiliation in the serving. The prisoners noticed too, not all at once, not in words. But the fact entered the room every Wednesday and sat down with them. The enemy was not feeding them scraps. The enemy was feeding them what he fed himself. By May 8, 1945, Germany had formally surrendered. Inside the camp, the news arrived through guards, paperwork, and the strange quiet that follows the end of something too large for one person to feel properly. Some women cried. Some stared at the floor. Some asked what would happen next. No one had a clean answer. The war was over, but captivity was not. Processing would take time. Transportation would take time. Europe itself was a wreck of missing trains, broken bridges, destroyed cities, and millions of displaced people moving through ruins. So the routine continued. Roll call, washroom, work detail, meal line, lights out, and every Wednesday brown butter. Then, in the 6th week, the shipment failed. A truck that was supposed to bring peanut butter went to another facility first. The camp kitchen received canned peaches instead, along with a crate of mild cheese. To Lawson, this looked like good fortune. The women had been suspicious of peanut butter from the beginning. Cheese was closer to Europe. Peaches were sweet. The menu would be easier for everyone. So on Wednesday supper, he served bean stew, white bread, canned peaches, and cheese. The first complaint arrived before the second table finished sitting down. A woman named Anneliese Vogt, a former medical clerk from Cologne, walked to the serving counter with her tray held in both hands. Her English was limited, but by then it was enough for the important things. She looked at Lawson and asked, "Where is brown butter?" Lawson thought he had misheard. "What?" She pointed to the bread. "The brown butter. Wednesday." He smiled because he assumed she was joking. "There's cheese today." "Better." Anneliese shook her head. "Wednesday is brown butter." Lawson looked over her shoulder. More women were watching, not angry, not greedy, not spoiled. Concerned, as if a clock had struck the wrong hour. Within 10 minutes, 11 women had asked a guard or kitchen worker the same question. "Where is the brown butter?" Lawson walked back into the kitchen and stood beside the open crate of peaches. Private Ruiz, his assistant, tried not to laugh. "Sergeant," he said, "I thought they hated that stuff." Lawson looked through the serving window at the mess hall. Women who had once feared the bread was poison were now upset because it was missing. He did not laugh. Not at first. Because the look on their faces told him this was not about taste. It was about proof. A prison camp strips away almost every choice a person has. Where to sleep, when to wake, when to speak, when to move, when to eat. Inside that kind of life, routine becomes more than routine. It becomes a wall you can lean against. Even an unpleasant thing becomes valuable if it arrives predictably, without cruelty, without surprise. The women did not miss peanut butter the way a child misses candy. They missed the assurance that Wednesday was still Wednesday. They missed the evidence that the system around them was not suddenly changing shape. They missed the one weekly meal that had become a test the Americans kept passing. Same bread, same tin, same tray, same treatment. Lawson understood only part of that in the moment, but part was enough. That night he wrote a longer note. Substituted cheese for peanut spread due to supply. Prisoner concern immediate. They asked for regular Wednesday ration. Not preference only. Appears connected to schedule. A captain from camp administration read it 2 days later and underlined one sentence. Appears connected to schedule. The next Wednesday, peanut butter was back. Lawson did not announce it. He did not make a lesson out of it. He did not tell the women he had listened. He simply put the tins on the prep table, opened them with a field can opener, and spread the brown paste across the white bread. When Hilde came through the line, she saw it before she reached him. For 1 second, her expression changed. Not into joy. Something quieter. Recognition. She took the tray, looked at Lawson, and nodded once. He nodded back. They did not share a language. They did not need one. By late summer, repatriation lists began to move. The women were told they would be sent back to Europe in groups. Not all at once. Not immediately. But soon enough that the camp changed again. The future had returned, and with it came a new fear. What does home mean when the country you served no longer exists? Hilde had no answer. Her last week in the Oklahoma camp passed through her hands like water. She washed her cup, folded her blanket, stood in line, ate oatmeal, listened to insects outside the barracks at night. On her final Wednesday, she took the peanut butter bread and ate it slowly. She did not scrape it, did not thin it with stew, did not reach for water halfway through. Lawson was watching return trays that day because he was always watching return trays. Hilde's came back empty. In his kitchen notes he wrote, "Second table woman ate full ration today. No trouble." Then he added something he had no reason to add. "I think she will make it." He did not know her name. He did not know she had once asked if his food was poison. He did not know that line would have broken her if she had read it then. "I think she will make it." It was the kind of sentence cooks write without understanding they are writing history. Going home should have felt like rescue. For many of the women, it felt like walking into another kind of captivity. Germany in 1945 was a country of lines. Lines for food, lines for papers, lines for transportation, lines for news of missing fathers, brothers, husbands, sons. Buildings stood with their insides exposed to the sky. Rail stations functioned in pieces. Families lived in cellars under houses that no longer had roofs. Hilde returned to Leipzig and found the street of her childhood still there, but not the life that had made it a street. Her father's watch bench was gone. Her mother was alive, but thin in a way Hilde had never seen before. The apartment smelled of damp plaster, cabbage water, and coal dust. The first meal her mother gave her was turnip soup. Not bad soup, not careless soup, the best soup available. A gray bowl with a few pieces of root floating near the surface. Hilde sat at the table and felt shame rise in her throat, because her stomach remembered Oklahoma. It remembered beans, bread, powdered milk, the heavy paste she had feared, the Wednesday ration she had learned to swallow, the same food as the guards. For the first time, she understood the cruelty of comparison. She had been fed better in enemy hands than her mother had been fed in a liberated Germany. That was not an easy truth to speak, so she did not speak it, not then. Most of the women stayed quiet when they returned. Their stories did not fit what hungry people wanted to hear. A comfortable prisoner sounds guilty to a starving civilian. A clean blanket sounds like betrayal to someone sleeping under broken roof beams. A guard who eats the same food as you sounds like a lie, when everyone has spent 12 years being taught that enemies are not human in the same way. So the women kept the camp inside themselves. They worked. They waited for ration cards. They searched for family. They learned which streets were safe after dark. They learned not to say too much. But memories look for doors. And eventually, the women found one another. A former nurse met a radio operator at an occupation office. A stenographer recognized a barracks voice in a church line. A medical clerk heard the words brown butter in a market and turned around so fast she nearly dropped her basket. They began meeting in small rooms. Not officially. Not as a society. Not as a movement. Just women who needed to know whether anyone else remembered the same impossible thing. At first, they talked about practical matters. Who got home? Who was missing? Which offices issued which papers? Where potatoes could still be found. Then someone would mention the camp. The clean soap, the weak coffee. The guards who were not gentle exactly but not cruel. The cook who watched trays like they were documents. And sooner or later someone would say it. Wednesday. Then the room would change. They would laugh because the memory was absurd. 58 German women trained by fear, taught to expect brutality, arguing in broken English for the return of a sticky American spread they had once believed might kill them. But after the laughter came silence, because every woman in that room knew what the story really meant. It meant the lie had failed at the table, not in a lecture hall, not in a courtroom, not because an American officer explained democracy to them in careful sentences, The lie failed because a guard took a bite first, because a cook served the same ration every week, because no one demanded gratitude, because the food was ordinary enough to be trusted slowly. That was the most destabilizing part. If the Americans had fed them a special feast, the women could have called it performance. If the Americans had lectured them while serving it, they could have called it manipulation. But nobody performed, nobody explained. The tray simply arrived, again and again and again. Years later, one of the women, Lotte Berg, became a school teacher outside Frankfurt. She rarely spoke about the war in personal terms. Like many teachers in the 1950s, she taught dates, maps, treaties, and the names of leaders whose decisions had burned through ordinary families. But once a year, when her students reached the final months of the war, she told them about the brown butter. She described the truck, the wire, the mess hall, the first bite that sealed her mouth shut. The students always laughed when she told them that the women later demanded it back. Lot let them laugh. Then she would say, "I am not telling you this because of the food. I am telling you because of what the food destroyed." And the classroom would settle. It destroyed the idea that the enemy had to hate us in order to defeat us. It destroyed the idea that being beaten meant being treated like an animal. It destroyed the comfort of believing every lie we had been handed. Then she would pause. And that was frightening, because once the enemy becomes human, you must ask what else you were wrong about. Some students forgot the story by winter. Some remembered it for the rest of their lives. That is how some truths move. Not through monuments, through classrooms, through kitchens, through one strange detail that refuses to disappear. Benjamin Lawson never knew any of that. He left the army in 1946 and returned to Georgia with 2 uniforms, a packet of discharge papers, and a habit of checking plates before he checked faces. He helped his uncle for a year, then opened a small lunch counter near the railroad depot in Macon. The sign said Lawson. He served biscuits, ham, coffee, fried catfish on Fridays, and peanut butter sandwiches for children whose mothers needed them to sit still for 10 minutes. He did not talk much about the camp. When asked about the war, he usually said, "I cooked." That was true. It was also incomplete, because he had done what cooks do at their best. He had paid attention to hunger without turning it into theater. He had noticed fear in a dining room. He had noticed waste on a tray. He had noticed that a missing food could disturb people more than a bad food. And when the brown butter disappeared, he put it back. History prefers men with maps, generals, presidents, commanders, the people who sign orders and stand beside flags. But sometimes history moves through people who refill water cups, people who open tins, people who serve the same ration to the person across from them and do not make a speech about it. Hilde Kraus lived quietly after the war. She repaired telephone lines for the civilian administration, married a railway clerk, and raised 2 sons in a country that spent decades arguing with its own memory. She did not become famous. She did not write a book. She did not call herself a victim, and she did not pretend innocence was simple. But late in life, when an interviewer asked what she remembered most clearly from captivity, she did not mention the wire. She did not mention the barracks. She said, "The brown butter." The interviewer asked why. Hilde laughed once, softly. Then she said, "Because I hated it. Then I waited for it. Then I understood what waiting for it meant." She explained it this way. When someone tells you all your life that another person is a monster, you can believe it very easily from far away. Distance helps a lie. Hunger helps a lie. Fear helps it most of all. She folded her hands before continuing. But when that person gives you the same food he eats himself and he does it again the next week and the week after, the lie must work harder. Eventually it becomes tired. That was as close as she ever came to a moral. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. Not a clean ending. Just the exhaustion of a lie when it has to compete with repeated ordinary decency. A rifle can force surrender. A speech can demand agreement. But neither one can make a frightened person revise the story inside her own head. For that, the evidence has to be smaller. A tray, a cup, a guard taking the first bite, a cook putting the missing food back where it belonged. The women had arrived in Oklahoma believing captivity would prove the Americans were monsters. Instead, week by week, Wednesday by Wednesday, the camp proved something more dangerous. The enemy could defeat you and still feed you. The enemy could guard you and still see your hunger. The enemy could be wrong about many things, guilty of many things, part of a terrible war, and still not be the monster you were ordered to imagine. That is not a soft truth. It is a hard one. Because once you know it, the old hatred has nowhere clean to stand. 58 women walked into that camp expecting cruelty. They found brown butter on white bread. They feared it, they learned it, they asked for it back. And in that strange, sticky, ordinary ration, a war built on distance met the one thing it could not survive: a shared table. Sometimes history turns on a battlefield, sometimes it turns on a spoon.